Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to the City of Santa Barbara Planning Commission meeting for July 15th, 2021. And as my colleagues come online to join me, a couple of administrative items I just want to mention on page 2 of our agenda that is posted on the city's website regarding public comment. As some of you noticed and asked me about from last Thursday's hearing, the 2 minutes per person to address commission really allow for a fair and equitable time allotment for everyone. If we allow one public commenter to go over extensively, that puts me and my colleagues in a very difficult position of allowing additional time without it being the formally notified and allowed time. So again, in an effort to be fair to all who are not central parties to a particular agenda item, we really need to ask for everyone's cooperation to try to constrain the speaking time to two minutes. And again, you have that timer up on the screen when we go through that portion. Additionally and separately, for Spanish interpretation, also on page 2 of our staff report, some community members have asked me to remind everyone that we do afford the community Spanish translation. So you see that both in English and Spanish on page 2 of our agenda. Please don't hesitate to contact our Planning Commission Secretary. The contact information is on the agenda. We want to make sure all members of the community and the public have an opportunity to speak to us, and this is a way to make them comfortable doing so. So with that, let's go ahead and Ms. Fennessy, if you would please come online to do roll call for us.
Thank you. I will now begin roll call. Chair Schwartz.
Here.
Vice Chair Escobedo.
Here.
Commissioner Bonderson.
Here.
Commissioner Higgins is absent. Commissioner Reed.
Here.
Commissioner Lodge.
Here.
And Commissioner Wiscombe.
Here.
Thank you. We have a quorum.
Thank you, Ms. Fennessy. So now we'll go to our preliminary matters and ask Ms. DeBusk to join us. The first item is any requests for continuances, withdrawals, postponements, or addition of ex-agenda items.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We have none.
Do we have any announcements or appeals?
Yes, I did want to announce that the appeal of the project at 11 Anacapa Street has been withdrawn. And I'd also like to announce that the appeal of 2 South Quarantina Street has been scheduled for the August 10th City Council meeting. We do need a Planning Commission representative for that, so I'd like to ask if we have any volunteers from the commission.
Commissioner Wiscombe?
Yeah, I'll volunteer. I believe I made the motion on that one, and I'd be happy to represent the commission.
Great, thank you.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Wiscombe. Anything else on this item, Ms. DeBusk, before we go to any public comment?
No, that's all.
Okay. Do we have any members of the public who would like to speak to us on items not on our agenda today? Ms. DeBusk?
Thank you. For the public, if you would like to make a comment on items that are not on today's agenda, please click the raise lower hand icon in the control panel, and I will notify you when it's your turn to speak. Each speaker has 2 minutes. The red arrow pointed down indicates that your hand is raised. At this time, we do not have any public speakers for general public comment. Ms. Fennessy, have we received any written correspondence?
We received 1 general public comment letter from Local Man, which was distributed to the commission prior to this meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. DeBusk and Ms. Fennessy. So with that, we're going to go to our new item. It's the one major item before us today. It's 701 North Milpa Street, formerly identified as 7 711 North Milpa Street. This proposal consists of a development agreement between the City of Santa Barbara and 711 North Milpas Partners LP. So with that, my colleagues can go ahead and turn off your webcams and audio and sit back for a bit. We're going to have, I believe, Miss Kennedy from city staff make a presentation to us as the staff planner on this item. And then we're going to go to the applicant, and I believe Mr. Jarrett Gorin is going to be the presenter for that. And I understand that the tech test was done so that his video and audio are working just fine. And then we'll go to any public comment from members of the public who would like to speak to us on this item today. So Ms. Kennedy, go ahead and proceed. And then we're not going to turn the timer on for you, as we typically don't for staff, although we're trying to, again, balance staff presentations with applicants. And I think there's been an arrangement with Mr. Gorin for maximum of 15 minutes, but of course he doesn't have to use all 15. So back to you, Ms. Kennedy, and welcome.
Great, thank you. Good afternoon, Madam Chair and Commissioners. Kathleen Kennedy, project planner, the case planner on this project. And as you said, the project is a development agreement for 701 North Milpa Street. Next slide, please. So the purpose of the hearing today is to consider the development agreement between the City of Santa Barbara and 711 North Milpas Partners LP. This was prepared in accordance with the term sheet authorized by the City Council. And the action today is to make a recommendation to City Council to either approve or approve with modifications the development agreement, or to disapprove the development agreement. Next slide, please. So the project site is located at 701 North Milpas. As you said, the former address was 711 North Milpas. Just to make that clear so there's no confusion. This originally had 8 parcels and they were merged. And now the new address is 701 North Milpas Street. Next slide, please. So it's very important to remind everyone just up front about this. There is an approved project for this project site. You'll see in the lower elevation there an approved project design. This has been submitted to the building department to go through the building permit application process, and it's currently under review. So there is an approved project already. And today's hearing is about changes to that approved project. And it's not a new project. Just wanted to make sure everyone is on the same page in that regard. Next slide, please. So a little background, back in June of 2020, council members Friedman and A. Gutierrez brought a proposal to City Council to discuss. The owners had approached them with some revisions to the approved project. Those revisions included a change in architecture to a Spanish Mediterranean style, a change from more contemporary. The addition of 6 more rental units, the provision of 16 moderate income affordable units, and this would include an increase in height. Council was directed staff to work with the owners to prepare a development agreement or some other formal streamlined approval. And this was approved by City Council on a 6-0 vote. Next slide, please. And then in August of 2020, Council reviewed a term sheet that had been negotiated between the city staff and the owners. Directed city staff and owner to use that non-binding term sheet as the basis to negotiate the development agreement. So the term sheet included, and this is what was reviewed at Council, it included project goals, a project description, review procedures for the proposed project, and some timeframes and deadlines for both the city and the owner. Next slide, please. So the term sheet, so since the review procedures are in the term sheet and they're not in the development agreement, I thought I would go through each of those. So the ones that have been completed thus far are the term sheet was reviewed and accepted by the City Council. And then the owner was to submit a development agreement to the city, which they did. And then that was reviewed by city staff. And then the next step was to bring this revised project to the ABR for review. 1 hearing was required, but the applicant chose to have 2 hearings. And since this was the most recent step, next slide, please, we'll go over the comments made by the ABR. So the board was generally accepting of the design exceeding the height limit, although they were concerned about some of the areas being too tall. And they were not able to state that the project meets the project compatibility analysis criteria at this point. They were not in support of the setback modification, stating that it results in an overbuilt project. They felt like it was not consistent with the infill design guidelines and not compatible with the neighborhood. And it was generally too tall, and that some of the apparent mass had not been resolved yet. Next slide, please. So in terms of the procedures today, of course, the Planning Commission will review the development agreement and make a recommendation. Next slide, please. And then the steps that are pending, assuming this moves forward to council, council would consider approval of the development agreement next. And then the owner would submit all required applications for these discretionary approvals. And those include the height exception request, setback modification for the vehicles parking in the front setback, parking modification for less than the required number of spaces. Then it would go to ABR for project design approval and final approval, and then of course on to building and grading permits. I want to say that I'm not going through all the plans in regard to the height and setback modifications, although the applicant will be going through each of those. So we'll get to those eventually here. Next slide, please. So the key provisions regarding the development agreement. First of all, it includes the revised project. It talks about adding the 6 rental units, increasing from 76 housing units to 82. 16 of them will be permanent, moderate income, affordable units. And then the change in architectural style from contemporary to Spanish Mediterranean style. Next slide, please. The development agreement has a project description attached to it. It's Exhibit B. This lays out the uses, the density, the maximum height, public improvements, etc. They're all written up there in the project description. Next slide, please. We do want to make one clarification and one change to the project description. It's I noted here, first paragraph, page 25 of 86 of the staff report. So this is the project description that's attached to the development agreement. And instead of saying that the owners plan to implement this local preference provision, we've changed it to what is on the screen here. The 16 moderate income units will be provided. And for those units, the owners voluntarily agree to use reasonable and good faith efforts to implement a local preference, specifically for local teachers and police officers, to the extent the local preference leasing policy is consistent with state and federal law. Of course, this is voluntary from the applicant, and we wanted to just clarify that they are going forward with this. Next slide, please. Another key provision in the development agreement has to do with the procedures and timelines. And I'll note a few of them here. The owner agrees to submit all discretionary applications, and those would be regarding the height and modifications, within 90 days of the effective date of the development agreement. If the city has not taken final action on all of these discretionary applications within 6 months of project being deemed complete, the owner may bring the project to the city council for final action. Next slide, please. The owner agrees to submit applications for building and grading permits within 90 days of the effective date of the discretionary approvals. The owner also agrees to submit all required fees and to request issuance of all required permits within 90 days of receiving written notice that the building and grading permits are ready to be issued. Next slide. The development agreement has a 10-year term. The city has the authority to terminate the development agreement in the event the owner has not cleared what we call the roof nailing inspection for the project within 36 months of securing their building permits. Next slide. So today, there are 3 development agreement findings for the Planning Commission to review and determine whether these can be made. So they are listed here. Number 1 is if it's consistent with the general plan and any applicable specific plan, is in substantial conformance with public necessity, convenience, general welfare, and good zoning practices. And it provides assurances to the developer of the right to develop the project in accordance with the terms of the agreement, and that adequate consideration is provided to the city. Next slide, please. So I've included the next 3 findings from your staff report. Just copy them here. I'll go through each one of those, and then you can refer to them later on in the hearing. They are listed on page 10 of 86 of your staff report. So the first finding would be that the development agreement is consistent with the general plan because the project's consistent with the land use designation of commercial high-density residential priority housing overlay. And it is consistent with the general plan policies as discussed in the staff report. And these include those related to affordable housing, infill development, and parking. Next slide. The development agreement is in substantial conformance with public necessity, convenience, general welfare, and good zoning practices because the revised project includes more housing. It includes 16 moderate income affordable units. The project's been revised and is consistent with the zoning designation, which intends to provide a wide range of uses, including housing and commercial. Next slide. And the third finding is the development agreement does provide assurances to the developer of the right to develop the project in accordance with the terms of the agreement. It provides adequate consideration for the city with the addition of the 6 housing units and the total of 16 moderate income affordable units. And it provides certain assurances to the owner regarding the parameters of the proposed project and includes timing to process the applications and the permits. Next slide, please. So when this project comes back to the Planning Commission, you will be considering the height exception, setback modification, and parking modification. Again, I haven't talked about the details of those. They are in the staff report, and the applicant will be presenting more information about that. But the Planning Commission will, when you make a decision in the future, your action must be consistent with the development agreement if it's approved in the project description. Therefore, an approval of the development agreement today would mean that the Commission expects that they will be able to make those findings at the subsequent hearing. So because of that, I am including all the findings for these discretionary applications. Next slide, please. The Commission is very familiar with these height exception findings. This is a community benefit housing project, and we would expect that these findings would be able to be made. They are, as you know, demonstrated need, architecture and design, livability, and sensitivity to context. Next slide, please. You'll also be looking at the setback modification findings. These are for the encroachment of the parking spaces within the front setback on Ortega Street. Now, this is the exact setback modification that was approved for the previous and approved project. The only difference in this case is that this project does include affordable housing, and that is included as one of the findings that could be made. Next slide, please. And then the second modification is for parking to allow less than the number of required parking spaces. So this proposal includes shared parking between the residential and commercial uses for those spaces within the setback. Because 6 of the residential spaces would not be available 24/7, a parking modification is required. Again, the applicant's presentation will go into the details of the timing of those, the use of those parking spaces. The staff expects that these findings can be made as well. Next slide, please. So the actions available to you today are to either recommend approval of the development agreement to City Council as proposed, making the findings in the staff report. You can recommend approval of the development agreement as modified, making the findings, or disapprove the development agreement. Next slide. It is staff's recommendation that the Planning Commission make a recommendation to approve the development agreement as proposed with edits to the project description as presented earlier today, making the development agreement findings outlined in the staff report. The next slide. Wanted to point out when different actions are appealable. So today, if the development agreement is disapproved by the Planning Commission today, it would be appealable by the applicant and appealed to the City Council. When the planning commission takes action on the height exceptions and modifications, those are appealable actions. And then the ABR project design and final approvals are also appealable actions. That concludes staff's presentation. Of course, I'm available for any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Kennedy. Well, we'll certainly bring you back after public comment and appreciate your participation here. So now let's go to Mr. Gorin, who I assume is eagerly waiting to provide his presentation. And once he's online and all set, then we'll ask Mr. Bolton to put up the 15 minutes. Welcome, Mr. Gorin.
Hello, how's it going? Great to be here this afternoon. I'm Jared Gorin from Vanguard Planning, and I represent the ownership on this project. And, you know, this development agreement, it's unusual. You don't always see these, but in this case, it's critical to give my clients some certainty and predictability in the process. And everybody is, I believe, familiar with what happened to them before. And that's not a process that anyone wants to repeat ever again. So
Mr. Gorin, let's stop the clock for a moment. I am only seeing blue on the screen here. Is that?
yeah,
Yes.
that's just a placeholder slide before we get into the
Okay,
presentation.
okay, just wanted to make sure the clock wasn't running and then not
Sure.
have the PowerPoint. Okay.
Sure. So the client decided voluntarily to go back and revisit the architecture of this project because the first architecture was really contentious, and they made a big investment here, and we thought that the certainty that's provided by a development agreement it's critical to us being able to move forward with what I'm going to walk you through next. So Mr. Bolton, if you can go to the next slide, and let's go to the next slide. So when you're trying to get a lot of housing units on relatively small infill parcels, which is precisely what the city aims to accomplish through the AUD program, you're going to get tall buildings. No one should be surprised by that. And for whatever reason, people always are. But you know, it's a function of geometry and space. We don't have huge pieces of land in Santa Barbara. We have smaller properties, which we've given some high densities, which we're hoping to fit our units in within our urban infill areas, which is a really good planning strategy. And the result of that is you're going to have multiple story buildings like this, and this is what you're ultimately going to see other places throughout the city. So this is the approved project on this site, and as staff noted, it's in the building department being plan checked right now, and you know, this is what we have on the site and would do if we can't make progress with our revised proposal. So the key statistics are here: 76 units. This project had no affordable units in it. That's about 50 units an acre density. It had some retail. It was 45 feet maximum height to the very top of that flat roof. And we had 76 parking spaces, 12 commercial parking spaces, and we didn't have any shared use spaces in this project. Next slide, please. So I'm going to walk through the proposed project now. We took the original project and essentially took the same building and made some modifications to it so that it would be in a more compatible Spanish architecture that more people are familiar with and like. We didn't radically redesign floor plans or massing or anything else. The key statistics here are 82 units. We now have 16 moderate income affordable units. We're at 54 units an acre, so it's roughly the same density as before. You can see that we cut down the amount of retail, and that's a function of taking some areas that we had that were previously retail areas, and we've transferred those uses over to things that serve the residential units, like a fitness center. We're going to have 24-hour concierge for the residents. We have like a business center because, you know, not everybody has their own computers and printers and everything. They can use common ones in our business center. And so that's how that all works. And now we're going to have 98 parking spaces. and 6 commercial parking spaces, which is what aligns with our 1365 square feet of retail. And now we're also going to have some shared use parking spaces, and I'll go through that later in the presentation. Next slide. So this is just a one above the other comparison. Staff showed you a similar thing here, but the project, it occupies pretty much the same space. You know, it's similar massing. This one's a little bit taller than the other project. And let's have the next slide, please. This is our north elevation that faces Milpas Street. And that's sort of the primary elevation that everybody's looking at here. Next slide. Keep going. I don't, these aren't showing up exactly the way I had them, but you can see the different heights on the building. And what you're seeing here is the whole front part of the building along Milpas Street is around 40, 41 feet. And then when you get back to the top of the roof in the back, it goes up to 49.5 feet. And then the very tallest parts of the building are just under 52 feet. So it's in some very isolated places. The reason the building has gotten taller is the change from the modern architecture to Spanish. Spanish has some different design elements in it, and the most obvious one that adds to height are parapets around the roof. The contemporary structure had just dead flat roofs, and this one has parapets, which is consistent with Spanish architecture, and that it adds a couple feet to the height. Also, the floor-to-floor heights changed slightly because the construction method changed with this architecture versus the modern architecture. We need a little bit more space to be able to get heating, ventilation, and air conditioning in without having to have really low soffits everywhere in all of the units. And that really, you know, it's to make sure these are nice, livable units. So the structure's increased in height. I don't think this is a radical increase, but on balance, I think that it works well. It's roughly the same size and mass as a structure. It's really hard to perceive, you know, a 4-foot height difference on a structure of this size when you're anywhere down looking at it for real, other than in these 2-dimensional elevations, which everybody's familiar that, you know, these always, you don't ever experience a project this way because of geometry, basically. Next slide, please. So this is the rear elevation that would face the junior high. And this doesn't show any of the parking structures or anything that are in front of it. And I think I want to point out at this point that these aren't the elevations. This is, we can't have you considering this project in a vacuum. So your commission has to have some kind of an idea of what's going to be going on out here. But these are going to be further refined as we go through ABR. We already have had some good comments from them on things like window proportions and looking at certain roof sections and those types of things. And we're going to continue to go through that whole process. But this is to, you know, give you a basic idea of where we're headed with this. Next slide, please. So that's the elevation that faces west. So this is, I guess it would be the uphill elevation. So you're just seeing the side of the building here. You can see here basically how we have the decks on the Milpas side and how far that 4th story is stepped back from Milpas. Next slide. This is our Ortega Street elevation, which is maybe the other most visible elevation from Milpas, although it is kind of a corner view you have of it. And again, you can see the decks over on the Milpas Street side and that the 4th story is stepped back. Next slide. This shows how sight lines work with this building, and that even from across the street, looking at the building, your sight line goes above the 4th story. So I don't think it's critical. I don't think there's any problem with there being a 4th story or that we, you know, have to hide it or anything like that. But the point of this is that when you experience this building from the street, you don't experience 4 stories straight up and down from the street. You really experience a 3-story building. And again, it's geometry at work. Here's how the sight lines go. Obviously, if you were on the same side of the street as this building, it would be a 3-story building. Next slide, please. So this is a photo simulation of the building, and these are just much better than elevations for showing how things are going to really look. And this is showing how the building fits in with, you can see the big, I forget, I think those are ficus trees on Milpas Street. So those are existing trees. And then you can see the trees that are proposed to go in along the front of the building. And you know, this building, it's taller than other buildings on Milpas, but it fits in with that neighborhood, and it fits in on this street. And you know, with proposed landscaping and existing trees, I think it's going to work out pretty well. So the next slide, please. So this is the Balboa building. I work in this building, and it's at 735 State Street. And that building is 75 feet tall. And I think it's the 2nd tallest building in all of Santa Barbara. So why am I showing you a picture of the Balboa building in this presentation? There always seems to be this idea that compatible equals homogeneous. And I disagree with that. I think that a variety in building heights and massing make a dynamic and desirable environment. And our downtown proves that. Taller buildings work in their surroundings in urban areas like the Milpas corridor. Can I have the next slide, please? So this is how you experience the 75-foot tall Balboa building from the sidewalk right next to it as you're walking towards it. And the setback is 0 feet in this case. And most people don't walk around with their necks cranked back looking at the sky. That you look in front of you when you're walking around. And when you walk on State Street, you don't experience some massive shock to your senses when you're next to this building or the El Paseo building or like the Granada building or Macy's. Most people, they don't really notice them. And if they did, that would be okay also. So the next slide, please. I think this project's going to fit in just fine on Milpas, and it's not only will it fit in and be compatible, but it's going to be a visual improvement, especially if you consider what's on the site right now and what your experience is on that particular block of Milpas Street. Have the next slide, please. So Ortega Street has been the other major topic of discussion on this project. So this is what it looks like today. And it is a street, but it's not really a street. It kind of functions more like a neighborhood parking lot. It doesn't go anywhere. You can see at the end of it there's a border, and you can't get through to the junior high. Next slide. So this is looking straight down on it. Next slide, please. Here's what we'll be approving it into. And can I have the next slide? So this is the modification we're talking about. And when we say setback, it's a setback to allow for this parking to be in the front setback, which is that dotted line on Ortega Street. So these are the parking spaces in question. Next slide. So the shared parking arrangement is going to work like this. During business hours, these 12 spaces that are in blue are going to be for commercial parking, 9 to 6. That one over there on the left is always going to be residential. Next slide. After hours, 6 of the parking spaces are going to be assigned residential parking to spaces in our building for residents. Next slide. So after 6, all days of the week, those 6 spaces will remain assigned residential parking. And then the 6 spaces closest to Milpas, those are going to be guest parking and reserved for residential guest parking, which there was no guest parking in the previous project, and it's not a requirement in the AUD program, but we will now have some guest parking, and that'll work with our concierge. Guests can pull up, go to the concierge, get a temporary pass, and put it in their car. So we think this is going to work out really well, and we're glad to have figured out this strategy with your transportation staff. Next slide. That's everything I have for you. I think this project implements city goals and policies. It's going to provide a lot of housing. It's going to provide twice the amount of affordable housing that is required under current city requirements. And it's a big community benefit, and it has to be a big community benefit in order to qualify for a development agreement. So we think it is, and we hope that your planning commission does too, and that you will send this forward to council with a positive recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gorin. You can go ahead and turn your webcam off and audio and relax for a bit. We're going to ask my colleagues to come back, and also Ms. DeBusk. And we'll see who from the public would like to speak to us today. As we have been in recent weeks, Ms. DeBusk announces the first couple of speakers so everyone can get ready with their technical access, and then we'll go from there. Ms. DeBusk, just wait 1 minute until we have all commissioners online, and we'll go to public comment. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. For the public, if you would like to make a public comment on this item, please click the raise lower hand icon that is in the control panel. I will notify you when it's your turn to speak, and you will have 2 minutes. The red arrow pointed down means that your hand has been raised. At this time, we do not have any members of the public that wish to speak. We'll give it another minute or so while I ask Ms. Fennessy if we've received written correspondence on this item.
We have received 2 public comment letters from Paulina Kahn and Francesca Galt that were distributed to the commission prior to this meeting. Thank you.
Thank you. So we now have 1 member of the public that wishes to speak on this item. Nadia Abushanab, you have been unmuted and you have 2 minutes.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Nadia Abushanab with Santa Barbara County Action Network. I'd just like to say that I support the changes of the project to include the affordable housing units, and I especially appreciate that it's above the required amount. I think that's really important for Santa Barbara and for that neighborhood specifically. And I do have concerns about the other units and concerns about gentrification in that neighborhood. So I'm just interested to see where this project goes, but overall I would support it. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Abushanab.
Thank you. And at this time, we do not have any other members of the public that wish to make comment on this item. I will let the public know that if they wish to be an interested party and follow this project as it continues, please submit an email request to pcsecretary@santabarbaraca.gov, or you can also call our Planning Commission secretary at the number on the screen, or submit a written request. And all of this information is available on our agenda. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. DeBusk. As we bring it back to the commission, I want to mention a few hopefully helpful tips for our deliberations. Well, first questions, then deliberations. So logistically, with Mr. Bolton assisting us, I want to identify some segments in our package that may be of interest to my colleagues in asking questions and then commenting. So let me first go, bear with me for a moment. I'd like to just bring these to your attention. So Ms. Kennedy pointed out on page 10 of 86 in our package, we have the findings, and she has slides 29 through 32 to assist us if we need that. Then we have Exhibit A in our package, which is page 13 of 86. That's the draft development agreement. From there in our packet, we have what's called Exhibit B, project description. That's on page 25 of 86. if anyone has questions there. And for Mr. Bolton's reference, we have another Exhibit B on page 29. I don't know if that was an oversight, but nonetheless, it's resolution number 89-120. And this lays out, going back to 1979, the parameters of development agreements and how we consider them and their purpose, et cetera, in the city. Additionally, Exhibit C, which is resolution number 19-027, is on page 39 of 86 in our package. Exhibit D on page 47 of 86 is the June 30th, 2020 Council Agenda Report, if anyone has questions or comments. And then I guess I'll say lastly, Exhibit F, we have the architectural sheets, and I'm sure Mr. Gorin be happy to entertain our questions on any of those details. So with that, it's now to my colleagues to see who might have questions of staff and or the applicant at this time. Commissioner Wiscombe, you want to kick that off? Your hand is up.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. I'm happy to kick it off. I don't need to go first if someone else would like to. I don't have many questions, but, and some of them did get answered by Ms. Ostranger, and if she would come on, I would greatly appreciate it. So we can have a little chat.
And I'm really just going by hands raised. That's how we do things with GoToWebinar. Unlike Zoom, I'm not looking for any kind of a technical hand raise. So back to you.
Great. Okay, thank you. Ms. Ostranger, I asked you a question about in the term sheet number 5, page 57 of 86, where it says that the city has the option to institute proceedings to terminate the DA, and I kind of thought that was insufficient. So I would just appreciate your explanation that goes back to page 14 of 86, paragraph 4 of the DA. Again, what I'm trying to avoid here when I asked you the question was a project where we have urban blight. In other words, something happens and it doesn't get finished and it just sits there and sits there. So what's the procedure? So, and you very nicely pointed out the government code language for me, which I think really helped.
Chair Schwartz and Commissioner Wiscombe, thank you for walking me back through those again, because I would have lost. Yes, so the paragraph 4 of the development agreement, which is on the screen, is intended to implement the more generic term paragraph that's paragraph 5 in the term sheet. So what the city and the owners agreed to in order to prevent a project sitting idle and the city having no recourse was to provide a termination date of 36 months after the grading permits had been issued to have a roof nailing inspection. I confess I don't know what a roof nailing inspection is, but yeah, it is a real thing. And so if for some reason the owners have not gotten that roof nailing inspection within that 3 years, the city has the right to hold a hearing and terminate the agreement if they so choose. Additionally, if you go through the development agreement on page, it's page 22 of 86 in your packet, there's a discussion about annual reviews. This is in conformance with our resolution that enacts development agreements, as well as the government code that authorizes development agreements. And government code 65865.1 provides for these annual reviews, and then goes on to say that if within the review there is substantial evidence that the owners have not been complying with the obligations of the development agreement, then the city has the option after a noticed hearing to terminate the agreement.
Great. Thank you for that explanation, because I was a little bit concerned about that, but I think you really helped walk me through that, and I think my fellow commissioners would appreciate that. If you'd stay on, Ms. Ostringer, I just have a couple more questions. Another thing that I don't want to say alarmed about, but I thought was a little bit too squishy in legal terms, non-legal terms. This is going back to, what page is that on? We talked about, sorry.
Page 13, section D.
Is it 13 of 86?
That's
Yes.
correct.
Yes, that's the permanently, yeah. Whereas the revised project will be in the best interest of both the city and the owner, as it will ensure 16 residential units will be permanently available for moderate income tenants. I didn't see that spelled out anywhere, and I was a little bit confused by the term, because if the development agreement was terminated, does this mean this permanence is terminated? So I wondered, is it possible to change that to in perpetuity, or something a little bit stronger, or add a definition that these units, these affordable units, are here in perpetuity?
Chair Schwartz and Commissioner Wiscombe, yes, we could make the language a little firmer that if the 16 residential units will be maintained for the life of the development, or something to that effect.
Great. Okay. Yeah, I think that's just important for clarity's sake. Because if you don't actually say that they will be, but you say here that it's in the best interest because they're permanent. So I think just changing that would be great on that. And then I have one more question. I think it's on page, I think it's 27. No, hold on, let me find it. Oh, no, sorry. It's on page 22 of 86. Sorry, Mr. Bolton, I'm bouncing you all around here. I wondered, is it possible, and I didn't ask you this because I thought of it later, is it possible to add a definition of a moderate income affordable unit to the definition section, so that we understand that? That's part one of my question.
Chair Schwartz, Commissioner Wiscombe, yes, we could add a definition.
Okay. Okay, and then the second part of my question is, which I asked and Mr. Busk answered, I guess it came from the applicant. I'm sorry, I'm just flipping through emails here. I had asked, and this might be for you, Ms. Ostringer, I had asked what the mix of these affordable units would be, and the answer that I got was the project overall has 63% 2 bedrooms and 37% 1 bedrooms. And the affordable units would be in the same percentage. And I don't know how my fellow commissioners feel about this, but just didn't want an overabundance of 1 bedrooms. I like the balance here, and I'm wondering, is it possible to add something that basically says that these percentages will be maintained for the percentages of 1 bedroom versus 2 bedroom in the overall project will be approximately the same percentages in the affordable units for the mix? Am I making myself clear?
Yes, Commissioner Wiscombe, I think I understand. You wanted something in writing, a term in writing that would fix the percentage mix as it was presented to you. I think that's the,
Yes, to fix the percentage mix as the same mix as the overall project. So if there are 63% two-bedroom units in the project, there will be 63%. And I think we have to use the term approximately, but 63% two-bedroom units in the affordable mix. So what I'm trying to avoid is that these all don't turn out to be, the affordable units don't all turn out to be, or the majority turn out to be just one-bedroom units, that we make some affordable two-bedroom units available. So
yes, Commissioner Wiscombe through the chair. I think that's a term we could, and the applicant would probably be amenable to. It's consistent with our, I believe our current AUD program is how we establish those affordable units as well.
okay, great. And I
Ms.
think
Ostringer, could you turn up your volume a little bit if that's possible? Thank you.
oh, and I just have one. Oh, Mr. Gorin, did you have a response to that?
Yeah, Chair Schwartz, Commissioner Wiscombe, we are amenable to that. That's our proposal. That we
Great.
want it to be. This is a typical concept with like accessible units too in the industry. So yeah, we just want them to match. We're not going to just take all one bedrooms and say those are the affordables. In fact,
Right.
most of the affordables are two bedrooms.
So you're agreeable to having an approximate mix similar to the approximate mix of all the units,
Yes.
is what you're saying. Okay. That I think that would be something appropriate. And then one last question. Thank you, Mr. Gorin. One last question that came up while I was listening to Ms. Kennedy's presentation, but it may be for you, Ms. Ostringer. I didn't see anything in there on how will compliance with affordability for the 16 units work. Is city staff going to be involved in making sure that they comply, or will they submit records, or?
Chair Schwartz and Commissioner Wiscombe, I imagine that yes, it will probably have to go as typical like our AUD program. Once the applicant's ready to identify the units, that we'll have to, the city will get involved with that as well.
Oh, okay, but we don't need to have that in the development agreement because that's part of the AUD program. Is that correct?
Commissioner Wiscombe, so this is outside of the AUD program. It is something that they're voluntarily providing to us, and the through the development agreement, we would be implementing this with them. So we would work with them to get them into the program.
Okay, so that would constitute the review of the units to maintain affordability, ensure affordability.
Correct, and they have voluntarily agreed to make their good faith effort to also provide a local preference as well for teachers and.
Right, yeah, and yeah, that language, yeah, Ms. Kennedy talked about the change in that language up front in one of her slides. It's on page 25 of 86 ago. I made a note of that. So that's all the questions I have, Madam Chair and Ms. Ostringer and staff. Thank you very much.
Thank you for being so efficient, Commissioner Wiscombe. I appreciate that. And before we go to Commissioner Lodge, just to remind my colleagues of the very narrow scope of our purview today. As you heard from Ms. Kennedy, this is one stop along the road of review and approval for the project. It's going to council, going back to ABR, eventually back to Planning Commission. So today is not the all-encompassing inquiry and deliberations. Okay, Commissioner Lodge, you're up next, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I wanted to point out that on page 53 of 86, this is after Commissioner Wiscombe's discussion of her concern about permanent and so on. page 53 of 86. It says per city under affordability covenants, per city policies, the moderate income units have a 90-year term. And I bring that up because there may be some conflict between using words about such as permanent or in perpetuity. And I guess this is a question for Ms. Ostringer.
Chair Schwartz, Commissioner Lodge, thank you for bringing that to my attention. That language for 90 years is consistent with our current affordable housing for moderate incomes. We deed restrict those properties for 90 years. So I imagine we would make that consistent with these proposed moderate income units that the owner is proposing to you.
Okay, well, as long as there isn't some conflict with something about permanent, because 90 years would not be considered permanent, I suppose, although it's a very long time. Okay, I don't actually have any other questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Lodge. Which of my colleagues would like to go next? Commissioner Bonderson.
Good afternoon, Chair Schwartz. Thank you so much. I have a question with regard to making sure I understand the specifics having to do with the event that the project applicant does not meet the 36-month requirement of the nailing inspection. I don't know who to direct this question to. Would it be Ms. Ostringer? Probably. All right, let's give it a try. You can redirect it to someone else if that's a better choice. I was actually very interested in understanding the different types of extensions that the staff report discusses. I noticed that there were a few different types, but I'm specifically interested in, I believe that it's on page 20, the permitted extensions by the city. It's number 21, mid-page. Thank you, Mr. Bolton. I believe that this is where my question would fall. I'm curious to understand how the applicant would request or negotiate an extension or recognize that an extension may be needed to be able to complete the workload. And when that event does take place, will we need to pause everything and update this document?
Chair Schwartz, Commissioner Bonderson, so are you asking if the community development director determines that it's in the best interest of the city to go ahead and extend the timelines that will we need to amend?
Yes.
And
yes.
With regards to, so no, because of the last sentence, or where is that? Any such extension shall not require an amendment of this agreement, so long as it involves the time for performance thereof, does not change the obligations. So as long as it's not relating to that 36 months or the 10 years of the agreement, then the community development director can just go ahead and unilaterally agree to extend the time. It's in the best interest of the city. If it were to involve the roof nailing or the 10 years, then we would need to amend it.
Thank you. I'd like to explain why I'm asking this question so that my next question makes sense to you, and hopefully it'll help us communicate easier. One of the things that was jumped out at me was the timeline as expressed in the staff report on page 5, very last section under term. And it was talking about, again, the roof nailing inspection for the project within 36 months of securing building permits. And I would like to understand, in the event that this project may take more than 36 months, let's say it takes 38 months. how do we support the project to completion? Is it simply a discretionary request in writing to the director, who then makes that decision on their own?
Chair Schwartz, Commissioner Bonderson, do you mean if it's specifically if the 36 months needed to be extended? And we
Yes,
had
I'm
to-
specifically talking about the construction, like as we start projecting outward and the building starts, rising, if construction timelines seem to shift, how do we handle that? How do we support this project to completion?
We would come back to, as you know, there'll be annual reviews. So they'll be checking in with the community development director and the public works director so that they can make sure that we're on track to meet these. So if we were to determine that 36 months was not going to be sufficient and was unrealistic, they would come back and through the commission and the council, and we would amend the development agreement.
Okay, and amending the development agreement, does it put a pause on everything, or does the work continue in the meantime?
The work would continue while the amendment worked its way through council. So it's good to think of the development agreement as a contract. So all the terms will continue until it's amended, and then that one provision will just amend that local term, whichever needed to be amended, and then it'll just keep going.
Excellent. That's exactly what I needed to understand. And lastly, is there any room in today's decision-making process to suggest a longer period of time if we wanted to potentially propose a 12 months more? Is that something that we can discuss and recommend here today?
Chair Schwartz and Commissioner Bonderson, because the 36 months wasn't specifically referenced in the term sheet. So yes, if you felt that it might need more. However, that 36 months was negotiated with the applicant and the owners and through city staff who have a good understanding of how long the projects take.
Thank you so much, Ms. Ostringer. That's that concludes my questions for now. Chair Schwartz, thank you.
Chair Schwartz, can I ask, is my volume better?
A little bit. You do sound a little distant, but I can hear you. I'm sure it's going to be fine for the recording. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Commissioner Bonderson. Just making a note on that last exchange between Commissioner Bonderson and Ms. Ostringer, myself. Commissioner Reed, please, questions for staff and or the applicant.
We can't hear you.
Commissioner Reed, one moment. There we go. I now
Yeah.
can hear you.
Ms. Ostringer, could you come back online? You seem to be the star of the show. Hi. So in the, it was referenced a couple times in the development agreement itself, terms like, phrases like subsequent actions shall not prevent development of the property for uses set forth in the project description, or provided that subsequent discretionary actions shall not prevent or delay development of the property or uses in intensity of development, yada, yada, yada. And then in the staff presentation, there was a slide, I didn't know which number it was, that said effectively, if we were to approve without modifications the development agreement today, we are in essence approving these actions in the future. And I would love to hear from you on that.
Chair Schwartz, Commissioner Reed. So yeah, that language you referenced about subsequent decisions shall not be generally inconsistent with the development agreement. That is because the development agreement is a contract. And so when we look at Exhibit B, it talks about the height, and I think it specifically lays out the height. and other things. So because it's a contractual agreement, the developer is getting assurances that that's what they're going to be allowed. So yes, when the discretionary decisions come back, you're generally tied to those height limits and whatever else is within the project description. The discretionary action, for example, if for some reason they came to you for the height increase for that discretionary and the setbacks, and the commission denied it, they would appeal it to the council, and presumably council would be able to make those decisions.
So let's say for reference on Exhibit B of the project description under building height, it states that this is a community benefit housing project and that the height will be X in some areas and will be X in others. So this agreement is already making our findings. I just, it's just an awkward place to be.
It's how this particular development agreement was negotiated. Per our city resolution, sometimes you can do the discretionary decisions at the same time, but this is the way it was agreed to. So
Okay.
yeah, it is, I agree, it seems a little awkward because it's going to come back and you're essentially agreeing to them through this development agreement, but perhaps there would be minor tweaks that would be allowed as long as what was agreed to in here was approved.
So to Chair Schwartz's comments a little earlier, she said this is just one of many, this is just a step, but in all practicality, it's not. This is it. We are deciding our future actions today. And in a way, they've already been decided for us, should we approve it.
To a large extent, yes.
Okay, and so we can approve without modifications, we can deny, or we can approve with modifications. So I assume we could start modifying Exhibit B.
Chair Schwartz, Commissioner Reed, to the extent that it would not be inconsistent with the term sheet that council agreed to with the applicant.
And that was a non-binding term sheet?
It's non-binding in that, yes, so we couldn't, if the development agreement wasn't approved, neither party could come and say, well, you already agreed to it.
Yeah. Okay. I would like to hear feedback from ideally all of my fellow commissioners on this, because this is new to me. Let's see. Thank you, Ms. Ostringer. I think that is good clarification. And then Mr. Gorin, could you come on? I just have one question on parking. Hi. So I understood the breakdown of how these 12 spots, I believe, in the setback would function. Great.
Hello. Hey, I'm sorry. It may be my audio connection, but I missed what you said.
Okay.
Yeah, hang on.
I just have some questions on the parking, in the 12 space setback.
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
The audio connection cut out. I'm sorry. I can, yes.
Okay. So I understand the creative breakdown of those uses, but why not? I mean, I think my question's pretty straightforward. Why not offer 6 of those 12 spaces in the setback at all times to residents, considering that the commercial only requires 6?
Chair Schwartz, Commissioner Reed, that was our original proposal to do that. And at a very late stage in the review process, the Transportation Division came forward and they said they had a problem with that because the original project had all 12 as commercial and they were using Ortega Street. And, you know, we were offered some solutions, including not having even those residential spaces for residential and keeping them all as commercial. And we weren't happy with that because we think that each unit needs a space, at least in non-business hours. So that's how we came up with the shared parking. And then the additional thing that we got out of that is the 6 spaces that are commercial spaces. We're getting those as exclusive residential guest parking in off hours, which we feel is a huge benefit. The original project never had that. And, you know, having those reserved exclusively for guests of our project after 6 p.m. versus people from other businesses in the neighborhood parking in those spaces is a benefit to us. And, you know, it'll keep those guests from parking in commercial spaces on the street. So that's how we ended up with it. It's a little unusual, but we're comfortable with it and we like it.
Okay, so if I understood that correctly, your preference is actually this as it's proposed now because you get the exclusive guest spaces after a certain hour versus just having. Okay. And thank you, Mr. Gordon. I think that's it. Do we have anybody from transportation with us that could speak to this creative proposal in a little bit more detail?
Hi, my name is Caitlin Momolsky and I'm a transportation planner. So Commissioner Reed and Chair Schwartz, originally transportation had approved these parking spaces as commercial with the intent that these spaces function like, it functions like a street. So with that in mind and keeping the needs of the community in mind, we wanted to keep these spaces available for the public, for people that were coming to the businesses, and we found that this was a good shared use of these spaces.
Okay, even though the commercial only requires 6 spaces and there is on-street parking?
Yeah, so there was a net loss of 1 parking space. So we feel that this balance of parking and this shared use is a good way to maintain those spaces.
Okay, great. Thank you. That's it for now.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner Reed. Next up, questions? Who do we have? Vice Chair Escobedo. There you are.
Madam Chair, all my questions have been asked and answered.
Oh my, okay.
Thank you.
Commissioner Wiscombe, follow-on questions? Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just had one after Commissioner Reed was talking about, he used the word awkward in terms of our really having to approve future findings today for a future meeting. And this question, I think maybe goes to Ms. Ostranger, but maybe to Ms. Kennedy. I don't know which one. I'm looking at page 8 of the staff report. And this is in the 4th paragraph. And it talks about staff is still working with the applicant on the exact scope in terms of the proposed parking modification. So I won't read the rest of it, but so, you know, we're making it on one assumption today, but if staff is still working on it, and when we get to findings, if in hearing number 2, I'll call it, we get to the discretionary actions and the findings we have to make. How is that handled if staff is still working with the applicant on the exact scope in terms of the proposed parking?
Chair Schwartz and Commissioner Wiscombe. So like I said, you're not technically making the findings for the setbacks today, but it would be, while they're still working, I think it would still be somewhat consistent with what's being proposed today.
Okay, that's what I wanted to hear, because you know, that's that could put us in a very difficult position at hearing number 2 if something were quite different that you know, perhaps there was you know, more public objection to or whatever. So, okay, thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Wiscombe. Commissioner Bonderson, follow-on questions or a question, either way?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, I'd actually like to address Mr. Gorin. Are you there, Mr. Gorin? Hello.
Yes.
Good afternoon.
Hi.
I wanted to actually direct my previous thoughts at you as the representative of the owners. When I see the number 36 months to complete a project of this caliber, it concerns me. I really would like to make sure that we are not setting you up for failure or setting you up for potential required extensions at a later time. I'd much rather give you a little extra time and you come in early, which I believe we would rather see. So I was curious to know, in your perfect world today, if you could have your dreams come true, would 12 months or 24 months of additional time make any sense? Or do you strongly believe that your project can be done in 36 months and you don't want to talk about it?
Chair Schwartz, Commissioner Bonderson, let me provide some clarification on that 36-month timeline. So when we were negotiating everything with the city attorney's office, we were a very foundational principle of this development agreement is make sure you do the work, right? Don't get an approval, pull a building permit, and then sit around, or don't demolish all the buildings and dig a big hole and then leave it sitting there for 5 years. So it's this concept of substantially complete. And so originally it just said substantially complete. And then the city attorney's office came back and asked a really good question, which was, hey, you know, maybe we should define what that is so that we don't sit here and wonder about it. Like, is there some bright line standard that we can have? So I think the key here, which I hope would make you more comfortable and everybody comfortable, is that 36 months is to substantially complete. It's not to complete. So roof nailing inspection, that's come up a bunch of times. Well, it is exactly what it sounds like it is. So basically, roof nailing inspection happens when you have completely framed the project in and all 4 stories are there and the roof plywood is on and it's been nailed in and they are inspecting that. So we all agreed that that is substantially complete as a project. And then from that point on, we are then gonna put the roof material on, get all the stucco on, get all the electrical and plumbing. We have quite a bit of time after that 36 months to actually complete the project. But we like that cutoff because it's a good indication to the city that we're really doing the project and moving it forward. And then there is flexibility built in. You know, again, that's one of the critical terms in the agreement, the 36 months and the 10 years. That one is such a big deal that if we think we're going to miss that one, we're going to come back in front of decision makers and, you know, we need to have a really compelling reason why we need more time. And while I would love to have an indefinite amount of time to do it, I don't think that that's going to be acceptable to the city or the community. And we're happy with the 36 months that's in there right now.
That's so good to hear. I really wanted to make sure that this was a comfortable amount of time to hit a realistic goal. With regard to what happens after the nailing inspection, I would assume it would take likely several more months. Do you have a goal in mind, or is it a discussion that's been set forth, or is it just, are we leaving that open to whatever takes place next?
Chair Schwartz, Commissioner Bonderson, the goal in mind is as fast as we can possibly do it. By the time we've got our roof nailing inspection, we have a huge amount of capital invested in this project, and it's in our best interest to get the thing finished and occupied and operational as quickly as we can possibly do it.
Okay. Is it in your favor for us to discuss that additional time or to leave it open?
The additional time beyond I'd rather just leave it to us to do it. I think the 36 months is a critical date and that we get substantially complete, but I don't, construction schedules are variable. Who knows what's going to be going on at that point. I think let's just let our construction people get the thing done as fast as they can.
Wonderful. This additional conversation has really helped me understand and put me at ease on how this is going to be taken care of. So thank you very much for your answer.
Thank you.
Madam Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Gorin, don't go away. I'm going to go into my questions. I think all of my colleagues have come online. I don't want to overlook anyone. Let me just wait a moment to see if anyone has either more questions or I think I've gotten to everybody. Okay. Mr. Gorin, in one of your slides, I apologize, I didn't write down the number of the slide. It has a view of Ortega Street showing the dead end at Santa Barbara Junior High School. Mr. Bolton, I don't know if we still have access to Mr. Gorin. There it is. Perhaps I'm not recalling correctly, but certainly when the Planning Commission reviewed the original project, I know that is the approved project. I don't believe this was barricaded off. So could you tell me about kind of when this occurred and by whom and any information? It's throwing me a bit that this is barricaded now. At least that's how it appears in the slide to me.
Chair Schwartz, I have no idea who put those barricades up or when. Who knows? Maybe the school put them up because this project was going on. I really don't know the answer to that. All I can say is it's a vehicle barricade. You can see in this photo that there's space left around it for pedestrian traffic to go through, which is how that place sort of operates and has in the past. But
Right.
I really don't know who put that up.
Okay. I think what you're referring to, and I don't know if Mr. Bolton has a mouse to move around here, but I'm going to say on the right side, I don't know what that would be, the west side of this red vehicle barrier. It looks like there is space there for pedestrians, students or otherwise, to go around it. It's a little difficult to see. Thank you. I'm wondering, staff, this is whether to Ms. Kennedy or anyone else, probably Ms. Kennedy, if you could hang tight, Mr. Gorin there. Since this is a public street, do you have knowledge of who erected this barricade?
Madam Chair.
And if it was done with approvals by the city?
I actually have no idea as well. I haven't seen that, so we can look into it. But
Yes, please.
we don't know at this point.
This is, again, I'm finding this disconcerting, and I don't know if it was done. I don't know. Did the city direct it and in cooperation with the commercial tenants in the area and the junior high school? So if you could please put that on your list, I'd appreciate it. Okay. Not to me, so.
Chair Schwartz, I think the next slide, the one that's a straight down view of this, you can, that shows that the pedestrian path is retained there. That barrier, it looks like Public Works K-rail. I don't know if Public Works put it there, but it's not on our property. It's somewhere either on the school property or it's off-site. We have no idea how that got there. It looks kind of
Okay.
like it's on the school property.
Okay, Miss Kennedy will follow up, but that's important to me as a follow-up item. Okay, in no particular order, Miss Kennedy, don't go away. You're a popular person with me today, so if you would stay with us. So in your slide 24 on your PowerPoint, there's a reference to local preference. And again, I'm gonna kind of let you and Mr. Gorin decide to talk about this. I'd like to know more about how that's being defined. There are legal issues with local preference that have been discussed at Planning Commission before. So number one, I'd like to know what definition we're using for local preference. I mean, what kind of authoritative government agency definition that allows us to be in compliance with the fair housing laws, and then who's going to administer that? Maybe I'll just stop there for a moment with my two-part question. Thank you.
Chair Schwartz, the local preference has not been defined. The owners have agreed that they will use good faith efforts to try and implement a local preference. This is a private project. It's not a government project, so it has different legal connotations with how local preference is enforced. The city will not monitor it. The applicant will tell the city how they are implementing this local preference.
So Ms. Ostringer, if the private property owner is going to, as you just put it, tell the city how it's going to implement that, what is the nexus between the development agreement, basically a legal contract between the city and the property owners, and this provision that is part of the deal or the agreement? I mean, okay, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Chair Schwartz, so they'll provide us with whatever documentation they have that shows how they intend to and will implement the this good faith efforts. As a city, we don't want to, and we should not direct them on how this is. And if we were to direct them on what local preference methods they use, then we're effectively reaching in and it's becoming more of a government thing. So we're leaving it to the developer and the owners to implement this and be in compliance with federal and state laws, and they'll have their own legal counsel that will assist them in making sure that they're compliant with state and federal laws.
Okay, one last question on this item before I move along. So in the periodic reviews that are going to take place, is that annual? Am I recalling? Well, I'll just call them periodic reviews, or the reviews subsequent to construction and full implementation of the development agreement. It sounds like, please confirm for me, that the city will have no role or ability to confirm, take any action, etc., on whether or not the property owners are truly implementing local preference. So it's this kind of loose term, it's like a term of art or something that we won't be directly involved in, and yet it has a place in the development agreement. So it's very odd to me. It's sort of a gray area of why it's in the development agreement if there's no enforcement of any particular kind, like we would have with other development agreements or conditional use permits, that sort of thing. Do you have any thoughts for me on that before I move to my next question?
Chair Schwartz, yes, it's in there because it is something that we are going to require that they show that they have made good faith efforts and that they're doing in compliance with, to the extent in compliance with state and federal law. So before their project's complete, they'll be showing us something. The development agreement has specific performance languages. So if they were
Okay.
not, then we can require that they specifically perform.
Okay, all right. I'll leave it there. Ms. Kennedy, on slide 20. Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Gorin, did you want, yes, go please.
I do, Chair Schwartz. Before we move on from this, I just noticed that this says specifically for local teachers and police officers. And I remember all of us talking before about, it had a broader term like teachers and first responders. And I think that's our intent, and we don't want to limit it exclusively to police officers. We would love to offer it to police officers, but I don't think that we would want to exclude people like firefighters. I think we said first responders earlier, and if it's okay with the commission, I actually would like this language to say local teachers and first responders, which I believe the term first responders would also include police officers.
Chair Schwartz, I don't have a problem with that from a legal perspective.
Yeah, I'm recalling the term first responders also back when the council considered this initially. So, but I'm not going to reference that document right now. I'll let Ms. Ostranger and the applicant work that out. Thank you very much. I'm glad we're talking about this in some level of detail today. Okay, very good. And then Ms. Kennedy, again, this is in no particular order, just working my way through the packet and my notes. Your slide 20, which talks about full application to be submitted. Could you please identify sort of a juncture in the process, the timeline of when a full application would be submitted? Not like a commitment by the applicant. I don't think we need Mr. Gorin to comment on this, but just process-wise, I'm interested to know at what point a full application would be submitted with all the relevant details then for full review, which we do not have today.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I believe pulling up the development agreement does say that the owner agrees to submit all discretionary.
Let's ask Mr. Bolton to pull that up on the screen then, so we're reading along together.
Or page 5 of 86 of the staff report.
Okay.
So the owner agrees to submit all discretionary applications within 90 days of the effective date of the development agreement. So if you recommend approval and it goes to council, say in a month, it would be within 90 days of that action that they need to submit the application.
Okay, of the council's action, if they move it forward, that's what I was looking to understand.
Yes.
That's what you're saying. Okay, that's very helpful. Thank you very much for that. Let me go to my next question, which I think was in conjunction with both what I heard perhaps from Commissioners Wiscombe and Lodge. So we have references pertaining to the moderate income tenants and the program, both in Exhibit A, which is, you don't have to go back and forth, Mr. Bolton. It's both in Exhibit A, page 13 of 86, but also, as I think Commissioner Lodge pointed out, let me see. Let me go to that. Because my question to you,
Madam Chair, it's the term sheet page 55 of 86.
Yes.
Sorry to interrupt, but that would just.
No, thank you. Yes. So I have this tabbed. Yes, page 55 of 86. And this is also, affordability covenants, and Commissioner Lodge pointed this out. I just want to understand, if you would please, if all of these references and the various legally binding documents that we're not going to work through today, will they reference the full set of requirements and provisions that we have in our city policies pertaining to the moderate income income and rent restricted program? I know we're not going to be, I'm sorry, go ahead, Miss Kennedy.
So this will need to comply with our standard affordability requirements, like any other project in town.
Okay.
Same process and procedures.
Thank you. Did you want to say anything further, Ms. Ostringer? Okay, now here's my part two of this question. So on the one hand, the program parameters, I'll just call them more terms, will have to comply with, follow our city program. And that's separate from the question I asked and the answers I got about local preference. So two very different things. We have the rent and the income rent restricted, and then we have the hiring preferring in some cases. And there may be some crossover between the city program parameters and hiring into the local preference. And I don't know, does somebody coordinate that or not? They're just considered sort of bifurcated, completely separate. That yes. Okay, so Ms. Ostringer's nodding yes, thank you. Okay, let me continue on. And then on this same note, but Commissioner Wiscombe asked about definitions, page 22 of 86. And it sounded like, I think it was Ms. Ostringer said, yes, we can include a definition of the moderate income affordable units. Can you just confirm for me that this will come from our city policies? The definition will comprehensively, accurately reflect the definitions we are currently using in our city policies and program. Is that, yes?
Chair Schwartz, yes, if we're going to, it's hard to draft on the fly, but
right.
What if we're instructed to add a definition, I would do some sort of language that says it's moderate income refers to, whatever current policy is for as of the effective date, which would be, in our affordable housing policies and procedures.
Okay. Vice Chair Escobedo, would you like to join the conversation?
If I can, Madam Chair. Ms. Ostringer, I was just looking at our inclusionary policy and they do have some definitions related to moderate income. So maybe we can just pull from that policy and place it in the DA.
Yes, we could take it from the AUD moderate income definitions.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Very good. Thanks for joining, Vice Chair Escobedo. Let's see, and then I've already covered that. Pardon me for just a moment. I think those are all of my questions. My colleagues very nicely asked some of mine. So I think those cover, let me just take one more moment. I think those cover my questions. Vice Chair Escobedo, did you have some follow-on questions? And then after that, we're going to take a 5-minute break and come back for comments, deliberations. Please go ahead, Vice Chair Escobedo.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It should be fairly quick. It's more of a scoping question. And just listening to the conversation so far, I want to make sure that I'm on the right track in our deliberations. So Ms. Kennedy, when I'm thinking about deliberations, if we approve the DA as is with no modifications, for our next hearing at Planning Commission, essentially height findings have already been made, but we would still have some discussion about setbacks and parking modifications. Is that correct?
Madam Chair, Commissioner Escobedo, so you will be deliberating about the height exception and the both of the setback, both of the modifications, the setback and parking modifications. So those 3 items will be back to you, even though we're saying that you are, if you approve or recommend approval of this development agreement, that you are predicting that you will be able to make the findings later, but you will still have to make those findings for those 3 items.
But I imagine that if we approve without modifications, that there will be essentially less discussion about height. It would be probably more focused on the parking, since parking hasn't really been 100% solidified with staff.
I'm not quite sure I understand your question.
I guess I'm saying that if we approve the DA as is with no modifications, we're essentially predicting that we're going to make the height findings of one of the 3 things that we're going to hear in the second hearing, which would make it really difficult for us to come to any other conclusion. But there's still discussion to be had about the parking modifications and the setbacks. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think though it'll essentially be the same thing that you're looking at today. I don't see any major changes between now and then.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Kennedy. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Commissioner Reed, follow-on questions, please.
Yeah, Chair Schwartz, just once. One more. Ms. Ostranger, could you come back on? I'm effectively going to ask you the same question I had. Because I'm stumped on this. So I'm not trying to preview my opinion either way on the setbacks, the height, or any of the quote unquote discretionary actions. But if we were to make modifications, could you consider? You don't have to give me the full answer right now. Maybe you can't give me an answer, but what could be modified today in the DA and the exhibits so that Planning Commission's full discretionary authority is intact for subsequent hearings on the height exception, setback modifications, and parking modifications?
Chair Schwartz, Commissioner Reed, generally, council has, when you look at the term sheet, and the project description, they've generally have indicated that they are in agreement with what was proposed in that term sheet. That's the guiding document that the parties have negotiated this DA in good faith. So for that reason, I'd say you have little wiggle room. However, with that being said, the Planning Commission could try and make a recommendation that a modification be made. But considering we negotiated this in good faith with the owners, so my general answer is you're looking at it to determine if it's compliant with our zoning policies, general plan, and that it's conforming to the term sheet. And then anything, if it's not in the term sheet that you think needs to be modified, then it should be modified.
So the difference between our normal review and this is that it started with council. Council has the authority, we don't. They give us that authority, and the process is just in reverse, effectively.
Chair Schwartz, yes. So it started with a two council member memo, I believe, and so that process to consider was kind of at the front end. Yeah. Okay. Fair enough. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, everyone. We're going with the staff's concurrence. I'm going to take a 10-minute break. So it's almost 2:45. Let's come back at 2:55, and then we'll bring it back to the commission for deliberations. Thank you. We're in recess. Commission meeting for July 15th, 2021, and it's now back to the Commission for deliberations. And let's go ahead and once again reference the 3 findings that are before us today. We do have a PowerPoint from staff on those, but they're also identified on page 10 of 86 of our package, Roman numeral 11 findings. So go ahead, Commissioner Wiscombe, if you'd like to kick it off, and then any other commissioners, whoever wants to go next, you can come on the screen now, or you can wait in the wings. So please go ahead, Commissioner Wiscombe.
Okay. Excuse me. Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll keep my comments brief. Given that City Council unanimously approved the non-binding term sheet, but it included the modifications, I realize the process is a little backwards, but and given the history on the project, which we have available in our packet, I don't remember what exhibit it is, that really recounts the numerous permitting activities that have occurred on the project. And I believe that we should approve the make the findings, and I'm happy to make those findings and approve the development agreement with a couple modifications. I think that the unanimous decision of the City Council and the applicant, who has gone through a very arduous process, really deserves deserves to know what the next steps are, and deserves to continue with the project in a manner that's agreeable to both the council and the applicant. So I'm appreciative of the development agreement from that standpoint. The only modifications that I would make would be on page 13 of 86 under D, where we talk about it will ensure that the 16 residential units will be permanently available for moderate income tenants, that we shore up that language to agree with the language on page 55 of 86, where it says 90 years. So that would be change number 1 that I would prefer to make. Under the local preference language, Ms. Kennedy showed the slide, changing the language on that and adding first responders and local teachers. I think that change should be made. I think on page 22 of 86, under definitions, again, I'd like to have a definition of a moderate income affordable unit. I think it's good, and that would, I think, as Ms. Ostrander said, would come from our city policies. And then I wouldn't know where to include it, but I'd also like to have an approximate percentage mix of 1 and 2 bedroom affordable units that generally follows the total percentage mix of all the units on the project. And those are the changes that I make, and I'd be happy to make that motion anytime. And that's all I have, Madam Chair.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner Wiscombe. And I was just looking for, I have that tabbed, the specific language that also Mr. Gorin referenced to change police officers to first responders. I'll find it in a moment. Going through 86 pages, sometimes the quick back and forth is a little cumbersome. Commissioner Lodge, comments, deliberations, please.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. There is a footnote, which I haven't been able to locate, which defines the moderate income. And I think it's around about page 5 of the staff report. But anyway, it is it's not in the development agreement, but it certainly could be lifted from there. And I concur with the changes you'd like to see, Mr. Wiscombe. And I'd just like to make some general comments. This proposal is certainly far more compatible architecturally with the neighborhood. And the having 16 out of the, or almost 20% of the units affordable is a great improvement over the previous project. However, we are in an awkward position with, the decisions having been made by the city council already on this. But I do want to comment that this is going to be a very large building. The footprint, well, it's 227 feet wide and 162 feet deep. And the only buildings I could think of offhand that are bigger than that are possibly the courthouse, although it's a very different thing and it's set way back within the block. And the old lemon packing plant on Quarantina Street. When I originally proposed the test program that became the AUD priority overlay, I didn't include Milpas Street because it has its own character and it is generally lower cost, more modest, and there's still many single family homes left on Milpas. And council I believe it was last fall, decided that they wanted to take the overlay off of it. So I think in terms of just overall planning for the community, this is not an appropriate development for this site. However, when the application was made, this was a possibility, and we have to go with it as it is. But I am pleased to see the number of affordable units and the change in the architecture, and so I can vote to approve the development agreement or make a recommendation to the council that it should approve the development agreement. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Lodge. Who would like to go next with comments, deliberations? Vice Chair Escobedo.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll be brief. I think I can agree to all of the changes that Commissioner Wiscombe asked for. Overall, I'm in favor of this development agreement and interested somewhat in development agreements in the future for negotiating more favorable terms. I mean, the fact that we were able to get 20% inclusionary on this project is a pretty big deal. The architecture is much improved from the previous project. I think the height, I can definitely, at the next meeting, make those findings. I somewhat do wish that we didn't have to come back to Planning Commission for that hearing. I wish we could have made that one hearing, just knowing some of the workload that staff has and what goes into having an item at Planning Commission. So I'll just make that comment if there's a way for us in the future to make that happen and streamline the process. I know it's a little awkward because it's a little backwards, but more specifically, some other comments, the parking accommodations, I actually found pretty clever. I actually liked those and the agreement that staff came up with the applicant. And I'm probably going to keep saying this, but I always am very fond of when Mr. Gorin comes in with the computer generated images. It always gives me a much better sense of what the context of the building will be in the neighborhood. So as we're addressing our multi-housing policies, maybe there's a way that we can substitute story poles for that technology. But in regards to the development agreement, I think it is very consistent with the agreed upon terms by City Council. I do like the amendments and I can support the development agreement and the recommendation that City Council approve it with the proposed changes from Commissioner Wiscombe.
Thank you. Commissioner Wiscombe, additional comments?
Yes, Madam Chair. I just wanted to comment on Vice Chair Escobedo's comment about it coming back to Planning Commission. My understanding is, and I don't dispute what you're saying at all for hearing number 2, but my understanding is that the decision that we make today, if we approve the development agreement, make a recommendation to approve it, is not appealable. But at hearing number 2, when we actually make the findings for the modifications, that is appealable. So the public has an opportunity at that meeting to appeal the project if they wish, and appeal our decision if they wish. So I think that actually gave me comfort, because that's where I was, I really, this has been contentious and the public needs to be involved, and that's their opportunity at our hearing number 2 to be involved and to state their piece and appeal if necessary. Thank you.
Yes, Vice Chair Escobedo.
I just wanted to thank Commissioner Wiscombe for clarifying that. So I missed that point earlier in the meeting, and it's a point well taken. I still have some issues with the findings and some of the discretionary decisions that we make. And so we'll get a chance to revisit those, I'm sure, in the near future. But thank you for clarifying that. I appreciate that.
Very good. Who would like to go next? Oh, Commissioner Reed and then Commissioner Bonderson. I think you both came on simultaneously. Commissioner Bonderson, go ahead. Commissioner. Oh, there we go. We did the old musical chairs switcheroo. Okay. Go ahead, Commissioner Bonderson.
Oh, you'd like me to go first? Okay. Thank you, Commissioner Reed. Very kind of you. I just would like to express my agreement with the way that Commissioner Wiscombe has proposed the motion. I'm very comfortable seconding it if that's an option, or at least agreeing to vote along with it. I also feel comfortable to make the findings for the height portion when the project comes back to us in the future. I'd like to also just point out a few things about the project that I found to be quite well done, and using Commissioner Escobedo's word as clever. I also found the parking solution to be quite thoughtful, and it's always welcoming to see projects that propose ideas outside of the box to solve very, very complex issues. I additionally would like to say that I'm very happy to see that the project changed styles from the contemporary to the Spanish style, proposing to stick with the Santa Barbara architectural expectation that we certainly like to see here. It also allows me to feel much, much more comfortable with the architectural articulations that we are seeing coming to ABR at the moment. I'm very, very happy to see the articulations which pop the 4th story back, and having those towers and so on, the pop outs. It really makes a project like this feel like it is at a much more human scale when somebody's walking down the street. And particularly with regard to the location on Milpas, this is the first type of project we're going to have constructed on that corridor. And I think it really sets a lovely precedence for future development to bring more housing into the area that supports our low income and our moderate income needs. And I cannot tell you how happy I am to see this type of project moving forward. And I really want to support the success of this project through construction and completion. So if there is a future need for an extension, I hope that it is easily granted and the project continues to move forward quickly to something that we all get to enjoy in our town. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Commissioner Reed, comments, deliberations?
Yeah, along the same lines as Commissioner Lodge, I think this project probably pushes the limits of compatibility for the neighborhood, size, bulk, and scale, but considering what it's giving, I think the affordability component is very generous. And to support I think it was one public commenter that we had, I think that's really nice for this neighborhood to be at 20% on the moderate rentals. I'm supportive of the proposed changes as discussed, and I am supportive of the findings in the staff report. I don't know how I feel, really. I'm torn on this, on development agreements in general. That might just be because this is one of the first. It is awkward. But I think this is a thoughtful project, and I think it's a vast improvement over what it once was. And I think ABR deserves a lot of credit there. They've really helped shape this project, and it's quite nice. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Reed. Any other follow-on comments before I comment? No? Okay. First, let me cut to the chase. I will be supporting the recommended modifications that Commissioner Wiscombe brought forward. And now I'd like to make some general comments if I could. First, I'm both pleased and relieved at the architectural stylistic change that we now have before us. And I think while I don't have any particular bias against any other architectural style, I think it's always a matter of certainly property owner taste, but also neighborhood compatibility. I think that the current design we see, which is a Spanish style design, is far more compatible. Not just compatible, but I was making some notes as Mr. Gorn was making his presentation. It's not only the aesthetic style, but the livability factor, I think, with the slight reconfiguration of the units and the overall building shape, shall I say, internal shape, I think will provide more air and light than the prior design, the prior structural configuration. And we talk a lot about, Commissioner Lodge, you and I have thought about this, the livability factor is so critical to the Santa Barbara experience, the Santa Barbara aesthetic, and I think what we've come to be known for. So I'm very appreciative of that. I want to mention one thing about the local preference. Commissioner Wiscombe
We'll give it a second and see if she can come back online. There she is. Madam Chair, you cut out.
Our community. Two points I'd like to make. First, I continue to be disappointed that our city hasn't taken up a concerted effort, well, really any formalized effort to create Milpas design guidelines. As some of my colleagues, well, actually, I think just Commissioner Lodge and I were probably the only ones involved when there was a 2-year timeout, or will recall, Commissioner Lodge, a 2-year timeout in the general plan process to create the Upper State Street design guidelines. It was very clearly needed, long overdue, and I feel the same way about Milpas design guidelines. So what does that leave us? And that's not just Planning Commission, it's all of the decision-making bodies in the city, is that we really struggle with how to define compatibility. Because when there's a first in a neighborhood, what is compatibility? What are the reference points? it's always difficult to be the first of change. Now, I will say that when the Planning Commission approved the AUD project that now has been constructed and is occupied in the 800 East Cannon Perdido Street area, this is Plaza Riviera, known as Plaza Riviera, someone can see right now what a Spanish style, though not mixed use, that's fully residential, smaller units, I may add, style looks like in this general neighborhood. So for anyone who is having some difficulty at a point of local reference, I think that's a good project to consider in terms of all the components we're talking about, especially stylistic aesthetics and neighborhood compatibility. I do appreciate that we're going to be including 16 income and rent restricted moderate units. I do agree with how Commissioner Reed referenced them. I think that is generous. It's above and beyond. And I'm so pleased to hear about the local preference being incorporated. We've been discussing this for some time, and it's been a difficult, I'll call it nut to crack, it's not a technical term, in terms of how to encourage and incorporate local preference into our housing policies. So I'm going to be very interested to follow this along. The balance between providing certainty to a housing applicant and also being considerate of neighborhood and sensitive to neighborhood compatibility. Striking that balance to me is essential. It's difficult to achieve, as we know, but I think we have to continue to strive to achieve that, because it's like pushing and pulling all these different levers to try to get more housing built. We're still in a housing crisis. At the same time, not discarding or ignoring the importance in our community of neighborhood consideration, neighborhood compatibility. So to me, it's not an either or. In fact, that would be irresponsible, in my opinion, of looking at this either or. So when Council members Friedman and Alejandro Gutierrez brought this forward, and when I listened again on replay recently to that conversation at council, and yes, the 6-0 vote, I thought, you know, as imperfect as this process may be, I at least believe it's moving us in an important direction, and we'll continue to refine it. That's what the adaptive management program, Commissioner Lodge, you'll remember this, we incorporated this into our general plan process that we put forward to the council back in 2011. That's the beauty of the adaptive management program. It is a tool that we have to continue to use. Can't just sit on the shelf. And that means we continue to monitor and evaluate and refine our processes and our policies for continuous improvement, for everyone's benefit, balanced benefit. So with that, I'm happy to turn it back over to my colleagues. If there's anything else to add, or if someone would like to make a motion, those are my thoughts for today. Commissioner Wiscombe?
Madam Chair, I'm happy to make the motion to move the findings, which are on, I think, page 10, the 3 findings, and with the following modifications to the development agreement, which is to on page 13 of 86, under D, basically resolve the language here with the language on the term sheet on page 55 of 86, which has 90 years, so that it's clear that these 16 residential units have a 90-year term of affordability. And you can leave it up to staff to do that any way they want. And then change the local preference language. Is it possible to put up the slide that Ms. Kennedy showed on that? Because I think there was some other redlining in that, wasn't there?
Is that slide 24, I think?
Is it? I didn't.
Miss Kennedy, was that slide? There we go.
There it is. Yeah, yeah, okay. And to use the language here, but also change specifically for local first responders and local teachers. Or local first responders and teachers, local teachers, whatever. I think change that language. And then on page 22, yes, under definitions, include a definition of a moderate income affordable unit. And that language can be taken from our city policies. And then also include somewhere that staff recommends a percentage, that the percentage mix of 1 and 2 bedroom affordable units generally follow the percentage mix of all the units. So if we have 63% 2 bedroom units in the project, that 63% of the 63% of the affordable units will be 2 bedroom. And those are my changes.
I'd be happy to second that if we are ready for a second.
We are ready. Commissioner Bonderson seconds the motion. Now it's discussion on that motion, please. Any thoughts, comments in any way? No? Okay, I don't have any comments myself. So let's see, Miss Fennessy, I think we're ready for you to come online and do a voice vote.
Thank you. I will go ahead and start the roll call vote. Vice Chair Escobedo,
Yes.
Commissioner Bonderson,
Yes.
Commissioner Reed,
Yes.
Commissioner Lodge,
Yes.
Commissioner Wiscombe,
Yes.
and Chair Schwartz.
Yes,
Thank you. Motion passes.
thank you, Miss Fennessy, and thanks to my colleagues. I think this item today was handled very efficiently, and appreciate, I want to say, give a note of appreciation to Vice Chair Escobedo. He and I had a preparatory meeting with staff that, in my opinion, I think helped. I'm hoping it helped staff. It certainly, I feel, helped us on the commission side to understand kind of our lane today, our purview, and with my colleagues' collaboration and cooperation, I think we moved very efficiently through that. So now we're going to go to our administrative agenda. And do we have any, gosh, it feels like we haven't done this in a while, colleagues. Committee and liaison reports. Let's first start, well, Commissioner Higgins is absent today. He's our liaison to staff hearing officer. So any other committee and liaison reports? Commissioner Lodge, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm sorry, because of the gap, we didn't do this administrative report. I'm not sure exactly which meeting of the HLC. I think it was the last meeting of the HLC, Historic Landmarks Commission. They okay to move forward to the Planning Commission, a project at 632 Paula Street, which is the second project, AUD project in the downtown with no parking. It will be coming to us in August.
Thank you, Commissioner Lodge. Indeed, it will. I just looked at it on the agenda the other day. Any other reports? Commissioner Wiscombe, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Since we didn't report last week, on July 2nd, the De La Guerra Plaza Revitalization Committee met, and we met basically to discuss some of the items in response to the Historic Landmarks Commission comments at our joint meeting. So we talked about the arcade, the interactive water feature, the public restrooms, planting, and very exciting City Hall landscaping on the Anacapa frontage. So those were the topics that we talked about, and the committee was pretty excited to potentially get some, the proposal is to move the flags from De La Guerra Plaza over to the Anacapa frontage at City Hall and to landscape it to be basically a model water-wise landscape for the city. Thank you.
Well, that's encouraging. Okay, thank you, Commissioner Wiscombe. Any other reports? Vice Chair Escobedo.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Update from Parks and Rec Commission from last month. Some pretty exciting stuff. The first is that they're phasing their reopening of their buildings now. So they're coming up with a plan for that. And the big hurdle right now is hiring staff. So we'll probably see limited hours for many of their buildings, but with the goal of opening them at pretty much full capacity in the near future. Some things to note, at the Cabrillo Pavilion, the new restaurant there is going to be Reunion Kitchen and Bar, and they're going to be opening up on September of this year. So that should be a nice addition to the community. And the meeting spaces will be available for rent in that building. But more specifically, something that pertains to the Planning Commission, on June 8th, Parks and Rec went to City Council, and I'm sure many of you watched that, but if you didn't, it was an update on Ortega Park. And so City Council directed staff to continue on with the application, but also directed staff to form a working group to focus on preservation of the murals and also focusing on the future murals program and what that would look like. Also supported designating Ortega Park as a cultural heritage park. And this proposal will go back to Parks and Rec Commission very soon. And I imagine that we'll be hearing more about it. It's separate from the application process, but it's an important component, I think, for our community. So we should be hearing more about that soon, especially when it does come to Planning Commission. And an update on the grant, we are still in the running for the State Parks Grant. So still more work to be done, but it is, I believe, on its way to Planning Commission sometime soon.
Okay, in a theater near you. Excellent.
Yep. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay. Any other reports? Please, Commissioner Vonderson.
Yes, thank you. I'm here. I have a few things to catch up on since we saw one another last with liaison reports. First and foremost, there was a Transportation and Circulation Committee meeting on Thursday, June 24th. And as you all know, those don't happen very regularly in the sense that they are usually once a month. And lately they have been even a further spread out. So I believe if I remember correctly, we haven't talked about this for at least 2 months, but their meeting was chock full of very, very positive updates and really exciting news. I'll start with the Chapala Street Vision Zero Safety Paving Project. They made an effort to address some ways to create more safety at crosswalks and eliminate threats to pedestrians by introducing new lights or proposing new lights. One in particular, which was discussed in length, was at Arriaga Street. And also they discussed the bike network connectivity that's going to take place around there. There was quite a long time spent expressing the way that the streets would change usage, in the sense that in a lot of these streets there will be stop sign delays or increase of side street traffic, but we're talking about seconds. Most people probably wouldn't notice, but in the exchange of that, we are getting a lot more safety for pedestrians, which is always a welcomed shift. Secondly, there were 2 program updates. One is with regard to the city pilot bike share program that we all here at Planning Commission are familiar with. Firstly, they have had very good statistics so far. They consider it to be a successful project based on the numbers that they are now collecting. But of course, it's going to take time to get more numbers and more ways to calculate those numbers to see what those really mean for us. And of course, as you all know, the 3-year pilot for that project was approved by City Council. And then lastly, there's the state budget surplus and active transportation program, which was getting funding allocated for projects here. They talked about a $75 billion surplus and how to find ways to tap into that and get more funding for exciting projects coming up ahead. Lastly, there was a discussion, I already said lastly, but I'll add one more piece. There was a bit of talk about the State Street bike corridor at the moment, how State Street is dealing with the bike share bicycle increase, as well as our existing bike usage on that street. And the thought had come up that due to that increase in the way that accidents are happening, pedestrian and bicycle collisions and other types of issues that are now being calculated and addressed, that needs to be something that will be a top priority once the State Street Committee begins taking action and meeting. So those were quite interesting. If anyone's interested, please follow their video. They also have a video just like the rest of us, and so you can catch up on that. Additionally, I have just a couple of projects quickly from ABR, all of them from June 14th. These projects are all with regard to added units in Santa Barbara, so I'll go quickly. First and foremost, final approval was provided for 102 South Voluntario Street. I have mentioned this one before. It's altering a single-story residential unit, creating an additional residential unit, so just doubling housing on that property. That's all I want to say about that one. And then the second one is final approval as well on 923 Castillo Street, which involves the construction of 3 new 2-bedroom condominium units. It also has 7 on-grade parking spaces. So it's that project actually is consistent with the general designation of medium-high density residential, which is nice because we see 3 more residential condominium units coming into action here. And those are the only projects I have at the moment. Everything else were unrelated to what we want to address here at Planning Commission. So.
Thank you. Thanks, Commissioner Bonderson. Commissioner Lodge, please.
Excuse me, Madam Chair. I found my notes from the July 7th meeting of the Historic Landmarks Commission. There was another item on the agenda that I thought was of interest. It's a project that was before the Planning Commission a long time ago at the old Greyhound bus site. And it was a mixed-use building, but a mixed-use building of commercial and office space. It said the approval was granted and it sat there, the lot sat there with weeds growing and nothing happened to it. I happened to run into the architect and asked him what was happening with it. And he said they decided it was just the wrong location for retail. It was too far off of State Street. And it is, instead of becoming a commercial office space project, it is going to be a project that consists of 20 fast charging electric vehicle chargers and an amenity area for customers, a new wood trellis and new landscaping. Completely different use.
Did you say offices, Commissioner Lodge? Did you say office space?
There had been in the project that was approved before.
Right.
Whereas now this is simply, it's just the lot with electric chargers on it and an area for people waiting, I suppose.
Interesting. Okay. Commissioner Wiscombe is she's eagerly wanting to participate in this.
No,
I could tell.
No, no, Madam Chair, I'm not. My only comment is that my recollection of that project is that it cannot be used for residential.
Correct.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
I think this sounds like a very creative use to me.
Yeah, as those of us who were serving on the commission at the time, the soil contamination, the ground contamination was determined by county environmental health to require a restriction for redevelopment that would not allow for residential. So if anybody's wondering, why can't we put residential there? Wouldn't that be a great location? Well, that's the reason why. So I'm going to use non-technical terms. The soil has to be sealed, basically, and then whatever redevelopment, new development built on top of that without disturbing the soil because of long-standing prior soil contamination that goes back prior to Greyhound. You'll recall this, my fellow commissioners who were serving all of us at the time. There was a dry cleaner there many decades ago before the Greyhound station. And that's what contributed. It's not the Greyhound station alone. So anyway, back to you, Commissioner Lodge. We were using your update as the jumping off point for some reminiscing, but and also to, yeah.
That's fine. I just think developers might consider that as 630 Chapala, for example, is a mixed use project. It has commercial space in it. And perhaps they might want to rethink that given what apparently the developer of the former Greyhound property discovered.
Yeah, interesting. Okay, any other reports? Just looking up and down the aisle, I don't see any hands. I'll just quickly report that being a member with Commissioner Higgins of the Highway 101 HOV Mainline Design Project, that's a mouthful, we're the working group. We've now had 11 meetings this year on design. And this last meeting, we covered the Cabrillo Interchange architectural details. We looked at a 5-year landscape planting and maintenance plan. And that will be most likely, no, it will require multi-agency agreement on who's going to maintain, that is financially maintain and otherwise maintain the plantings over a number of years. We looked at signage, street lighting. Lighting is very important. And boy, have I learned a lot about lighting, not being a lighting expert myself, but it's quite an array of lighting considerations, not just the physical lighting, but for safety and also needing to avoid nighttime lighting pollution since it's very near some neighboring residential and so forth. And then we just looked at how to continue to forge consensus among our working group. And from there, I believe that the applicant team is going to go forward now to the various decision-making bodies. So you'll probably hear about that shortly. And that's it from my report. I don't see any raising of hands. So with that, I'm ready to adjourn our meeting for July 15th. Hope everyone continues to stay well and rested. We have a bit of a hiatus before we return, doing this from memory, August 5th. So if I don't see you before then, stay well. And thanks again to staff, the applicant, the public. See you all soon. Bye-bye.